Imagine you're pushing everything you have to the limit. The engine screams, the tires bite the asphalt, and for a few perfect seconds, you and the machine are one. Now imagine that perfect second fracturing into chaos. Welcome to Horizon Resonance. Today we're talking about moments when speed stops being poetry and becomes catastrophe. The crashes that rewrote safety rules, humbled champions, and changed how racing teams think about risk. This is not a road rage tale or a viral clip. This is about the thin edge between mastery and disaster, and how a single decision at high speed can ripple through lives and the entire sport. The story begins with ambition. A small private event, a straight that promises speed, and a driver with everything to prove. The car was immaculate, stripped interior, tuned suspension, tires fresh off the pits. The team had shaved weight like a surgeon. Every bolt, every gram accounted for. The driver had one goal: beat the benchmark, set the fastest sector, etch his name into the record books. At first it looked flawless. The car leapt forward with a calculated ferocity. The telemetry looked clean, high revs, perfect downforce, cornering lines that were textbook. Fans cheered, the engine note climbed. Then, somewhere between confidence and habit, a small variable crept in. A wet patch from an earlier shower, a tiny debris chip on the racing line, a slight misread of a braking point. None of these are dramatic alone. Together, at triple-digit speed, they made the margin vanish. What followed was a chain reaction. A slight lift, a twitch in the rear, and suddenly the car found itself out of balance. In an instant, the driver fought for control, steering inputs countering yaw, a stomp on the brake that upset weight distribution, a correction that spun the balance the other way. The car snapped across the track, kissed a barrier at an oblique angle, and rolled. Metal shrieked. Flames did not immediately erupt, but the violence of the impact was unmistakable. The visual is searing, a tumble of carbon and steel, tire smoke, the sudden awful silence that follows a violent crash. Medics arrived in minutes. The driver, remarkably, survived with serious injuries. Broken bones, concussion, a long rehabilitation ahead. The car, however, was written off. What made headlines wasn't only the spectacle, it was the questions. Why did this happen? Who was responsible? Could it have been prevented? Investigations peeled back layers. Telemetry told one story: a spike in steering torque, a sudden change in lateral g-forces, a brake pressure curve that ended abruptly. Mechanics found a micro-failure in a suspension mounting point. Not a dramatic catastrophe of design, but a fatigue fracture. A tiny crack that had grown over time. Maintenance logs, when examined, showed that the component had been noted as near service, but not replaced. A small decision, deferred. A budget cut here, a rushed check there. In the calculus of margins, that omission mattered. Beyond parts, human factors played a role. The team had pushed schedules all week. The crew was tired. The driver had repeated the line dozens of times, muscle memory taking over. And perhaps, a false sense of security. Confidence at speed can be a double-edged sword. When every split second matters, even a subtle overcommitment can amplify the impact of a small mechanical issue. The fallout was immediate and systemic. First, safety. Gear and extraction procedures were reviewed. The driver's survival owed as much to modern helmet and restraint systems as to luck. Second, the team accepted scrutiny. And that's where real change began. Racing organizations tightened maintenance checklists and enforced mandatory replacement intervals for critical components. Tracks revised wet weather policies and updated trackside response protocols. What started as a private misfortune became a catalyst for industry-wide reform. There's another layer to these stories. The cultural pressure inside racing. Speed is currency. Sponsors demand headlines. Young drivers feel they must prove themselves at every run. Teams push limits because the margin between winning and obscurity is razor thin. That environment encourages the kind of decisions that, over time, increase risk. After this crash, conversations shifted. More people began to ask, not just, can we go faster, but at what cost? But we shouldn't simplify. Racing has always been a dance with danger. Many advances in road. Safety came from lessons learned on the track. Seatbelts, crash structures, fuel cells. Technology born from looking closely at failure. The cruel irony is that progress often follows a hard lesson. The important thing is whether the lesson leads to change or is forgotten in the next season's hype. What can teams and drivers learn from a collapse like this? First, redundancy is not optional. Critical components need redundant checks. Physical inspection, torque verification, and a fresh replacement schedule that doesn't rely on hope. Second, telemetry is your friend, but data must be trusted only when cross-checked with human inspection. A sensor spike should trigger hands-on verification, not a shrug. Third, the human factor. Fatigue, schedule pressure, sober judgment. These are as important as parts and software. Rest, honest communication within the team, and a culture that allows crew members to call a stop without fear of reprisal are essential. For drivers, the lesson is humility. Even mastery is conditional. The fastest lap often comes from measured aggression, not reckless bravado. A conservative approach in one sector might be the difference between a podium and a life-changing crash. And for sponsors and fans, a reminder: the spectacle is thrilling, but the people behind the wheel are human. Their safety should never be a bargaining chip. There are also practical non-technical takeaways for anyone who loves cars, whether on the track or the road. Regular maintenance matters, not only when something is obviously wrong, but as a preventative habit. Know your limits and respect changing conditions. A dry line turns treacherous with a late rain. And finally, invest in safety gear that matches the speed you're chasing. Because the right helmet, harness, and structural integrity can be the difference between a headline and a tragedy. In the months and years after that crash, the driver returned to the public eye in a quieter way, not chasing records, but coaching, advocating for safety, and working with engineers to improve component life monitoring. The team implemented new procedures and became a case study for proactive safety culture. The sport lost nothing of its speed, but gained something more valuable: better habits, better checks, and a sharper focus on systems that protect the humans who take the risks. So why do these stories grip us? Maybe because speed is one of the last places where humans still match machines. A raw duel of reflex, training, and courage. And when it goes wrong, the consequences are visceral. We feel the vulnerability, and we learn. That is the paradox of the sport. Its greatest tragedies often become the seed of progress. If you could change one thing about how racing teams approach safety, what would it be? Would you push for stricter maintenance rules, more conservative driver policies, or better real-time telemetry that forces a pit stop at the first sign of anomaly? Tell me in the comments. I'll read the most thoughtful replies in the next episode. If you liked this deep dive, hit subscribe and ring the bell for daily stories where speed meets consequence. I'm Horizon Resonance. Keep the throttle honest and the checks thorough. See you in the next one.